Today I am going to work in my Society of Idea Collectors. Yes, I got inspired. How can you not get inspired with Dede Willingham? It just happens. She did a Society of Idea Collectors video this week. I finally got a chance to go out and watch it. Yes, I did, and I did all the exercises with her watching the video replay. Look at this. Look at all these mind maps that she did with her YouTube live stream. Now, what she did was she took a hummingbird and she explored the picture. She showed the hummingbird to the people who attended her live stream, asked them to make a list. She made a list, she kept it quiet, and then they read off the list and she picked some things out there that inspired her. So I did the same thing. She asked for colors, for emotions, how the picture made you feel. I added the physical touch. And then she asked the who, when, where, what, why, how questions. And of course I add the why not, what if, wherever, whenever, wow. I've added a couple more. Listen, because I find that if I listen to those around me, even if I discuss something with those around me and listen to their thoughts, or if I just be quiet for a while and listen to my own mind. So I added listen, and let's see, I think I added another one, sounds. I added sounds. And I think Dede kind of touched on sounds a little on one of these when she was talking about when they lived in Alaska. So I added sounds, and those are all questions that I'm asking myself when I go through and do these exercises, these mind mapping things. I picked up some phrases in her conversation. She calls them wing nuts. Whenever something is said during her live stream, she writes it down and puts it in her wing nut book. Well, I just jot it down on my page. Train the brain. Doodle while you're thinking. Make a list of your questions. Write it down. Dede says, write it down, write it down, write it down. Write down what comes to you. Roll with the design. That was a phrase that was mentioned in her live. Let's see. Research. I added research. Dede talks about designseeds.com because she likes to go out and pull a picture from there and it gives all of the colors. But the idea was to look at a picture, do the initial first impression you have at that picture. Make a list of what things hit you first about that picture. What things caught your attention? I had made a note here because I was noting as Dede was showing the pictures. Now, I'm only looking on my little phone, so it takes me some time to figure out what that picture is. She showed a candy box, and to me it looked like a row of flowers put side by side, and it took me a while to figure out that they were really candy. And she showed a koi pond, and I looked at it first, and I saw monsters. I must have monsters on the brain because that's what I saw. So I'm not sure that if I were looking at a picture right under my face, if I would have that same experience. I was watching her on my little phone, which has a smaller picture, and it was about a foot away from me. But it was an interesting experience because I came up with different impressions. So what am I going to do for my Society of Idea Collectors? This is my journal for 2018. So far, yeah, this is what it's looking like. I have taken some already and put over in the custom keeper that I got from Shannon Green. So this is just maybe a half year of it. I'm trying really hard to catch up by the end of the year. I don't know if I'll be there, but I'm working on it. So I'm going to set that aside. And these are all my notes. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just showing you that, yeah, I followed along with her. I enjoyed this. I always enjoy mind mapping and Society of Idea Collectors. Just thoroughly enjoy it. Now I have a piece of watercolor paper cut to the size that will fit in my Society of Idea Collectors. And what I am going to do is I'm going to go out to Pixabay. Pixabay is a site where you can go out and search for images and download them and not have to worry about copyright violations and that type of thing. So I'm going to hit Browse for Images, and I'm just going to choose the popular right here, and I'm going to choose a number. I'm going to choose a number like 45. And whatever that picture is on number 45 is the picture that I'm going to download and mind map. And I'm going to do that in this video. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. I think I said 45. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. I don't know what that one is. It's a sunrise. So that's 38. 39, 40. So let's see what 45 is. 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Oh, it's a bunch of grapes. How are you going to mind map a bunch of grapes? That's going to be interesting. Well, all right. So the first thing I'm going to do, and while I have my paintbrushes and pencils out here, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download it. Let's download it. I'm on my gallery, and I'm going to just, I do that because then I can expand the picture and do like this to see it. So, this is going to be an interesting photograph to mind map, but that's what makes it a challenge. So, I am going to first, over here in my little circle, I'm going to draw and paint this, and I'll go into fast forward, then I will come back and talk about it and mind map it. I start out by drawing the circle. Dede uses this circle to put in the theme of the mind map. Instead of actually writing out the words, I'm going to sketch the picture. And I do this both for my Society of Idea Collectors art journal, and while I'm doing this, I'm not only thinking about the artistic elements like the color and shape and the composition of the grapes within this little circle. I'm thinking about mind mapping this cluster of grapes. How am I going to mind map it? So my mind is working on, what do I actually want to do with this? Now, Dede talks about colors and feeling and getting the initial impression of your photograph. And then we go into the questions, the who, what, when, where, why, how, what if, whenever, whatever, why not? Wow. The wow for me is wonder of wonders, and then I add sounds and listen. Under the feeling, I add the touch, and Dede talked about the emotions, and this is episode 40, Society of Idea Collectors, and over on the left, I write out the little list and put my initial impressions on there. Okay, here's the start to my mind map, and I'm following the same type of mind mapping that Dede did in her episode number 40, Society of Idea Collectors. I will link to that in my description box below. But I thought I would stop here because one of the things that she asked us to list were the colors. So we're going to look at this picture. This is from Pixabay. I'm going to look at this picture and I'm going to list some of the colors that I'm seeing. I see, of course, I see black. That's all this area way back in the background. So that's, I noticed that pretty much all that negative space pretty much right off the bat. And of course, the green leaves. Now you don't just see one shade of green. You see shades of green. Shades like shades of gray, shades of green. because you see the sort of the bright greens here and the really light greens there, the even lighter greens of the grapes. And then you see some very, very light, I call it a bluish purple. It's a really ultra light blue purple. Just as the grapes in here are just starting to turn purple, you see some light yellows, some red rust. I'm going to put red rust on there, the kind of spotty. And I think you could even say some Payne's gray. And what else do I see? Maybe you could probably put a touch of brown in there. Just a touch. I'm going to look brown. You could go burnt umber, or, gosh, you could do raw sienna. You could do different shades of brown. And talking about shades, I see the shade of this leaf all over the grapes right in here. And I don't think I captured that too well in my drawing. I got this part of the leaf, I had expanded it like this. So these part of the grapes in here are in shade. So I'm going to put shady grapes from the leaves. That's just kind of reminding me that this part of the grape in here is kind of it's being shaded by the leaf. So those are kind of the colors that I see. Now, touch. Touch is something you have to imagine, because I know how it feels to touch grapes. They're kind of smooth, and if they're on the vine, they're plump. So the touch is more, for me, when I'm looking at a picture, is more of it's a sensory touch. I'm talking about a physical touch, but it's also a memory touch. So I'm going to put memory touch. It isn't anything like if I were taking this and holding it in my hand, I could feel the coolness of this tin. I could feel the ridges on here. I could feel that it was a solid piece and hard tin instead of something soft and squishy. But I can't do that with a picture. Now I know from memory touch that grapes are squishy because they're juicy. Squishy, juicy. The ones that haven't ripened yet may be a little hard, a little firm if they're not ripe yet. The leaves, you know how a leaf feels? You can kind of feel that a rough texture of a leaf. You know, a leaf has veins. As you run your hands over a leaf, you can kind of feel where the veins of the leaf are. And how to touch, feeling emotional. Now, how does it make me feel? Well, it makes me feel like I should go on a diet. So for me, grapes are a salad. Grapes to me always were a diet food. It was something that I had as a salad or a diet dessert. Of course, they can be used in other dishes too. I'm just talking from my own experiences. So it reminds me of food, and it reminds me of dieting. So those are those questions, the colors and the feelings. Now, my first impressions of looking at this is I see a cluster. So I'm going to say cluster. And now in Dede's session, you can go realistic toward this, or you can go whimsical. You can get go fantastical. You can go into fantasy. You can use your imagination and say these grapes are magical grapes. they only are grown one season of the year when the moon shines, something like that, on the leaf. And then they all pop out. So you can invent all these imaginary stories from that. That is not really the impression that I get from looking at this picture. It's an impression that I get from watching the episode 40 at Dede Willingham Society of Idea Collectors as one way to approach looking at a picture. But as I look at this, I think of the vineyard workers, the people who have to care for them and harvest them. The vineyard workers who have to, I want to say cook them, but make them into a product to sell. So make product, I'm going to put just as a quick thing. Another impression I get is, well, I said cluster, and I think of cluster as being several things all clustered together. It kind of reminds me of, I hate to say this, it kind of reminds me of rocks. And I know that grapes are not rocks, but it kind of reminds me of little stones of gravel, maybe a wishing well. Now I'm getting kind of going into that fantasy thing again, but wishing well, we used to take little stones of gravel, and that's what this reminds me of. It might be a little wishing well there. It, of course, reminds me of liquor, because L-I-Q-U-O, I'm not sure it's liquor, L-U-O-U-R, liquor. What else does it remind me of? Late summer. I think of Napa Valley in the States, so Napa Valley, and it reminds me of France. Maybe, is that the Bordeaux region over in France? And as I'm looking at it, not as I look at the picture, but as I think of the grapes and how they're used, I think of a very rich family that might own a vineyard. So I'm going to say rich, let's say French family, and they're vineyard owners. And of course that could get into legacy, and I'm getting into that because not too long ago I read a book about a lady whose family was based over in the French region, and she traveled over there. She was training to be a master, what do they call them, sommeliers or something like that. They're experts in wine. And let's see, what else does it remind me of? I tell you, mind mapping a picture of grapes is very interesting. So we're looking at one cluster. So what if this was the only cluster in the entire vineyard? What if they had a really bad year and they only got one cluster of grapes? Now we're going to get into the fantasy again, but that one cluster of grapes was all they needed to make it through the year. Maybe the taste, or maybe everybody else had a bad year and everybody wanted grapes. I mean, I'm pulling things out of my head. Now that's just initial. I'm going, and you may too when you pull things out. What do you mean one cluster of grapes and they had a bad year? That's stupid. It doesn't matter how stupid something is. Write it down, because it might, I'm not saying that this would develop into a story, but an idea that looks stupid may develop into one of your best ideas ever. So those are kind of my initial impressions just as I look at this. I kind of think, I'm kind of thinking about maybe an animal that would come and eat it. What animals are pests on the vineyards? That might be something, animals that are vineyard pests. And that would be something that I would probably research to see. And, there's surely some insect pests. How do they, probably more insect pests than animal pests, but how are they handled? I have no idea. So that would be something to possibly research. I know they have a lot of weather conditions that hit them. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge to mind map a cluster of grapes. It's a challenge. So let's go into the questions real fast, and then I'm going to go into fast forward and actually paint these, because I find as I paint, I go into that kind of a subconscious thing to where I might come up with something while I'm painting that would really fit this. So, but let's go into my questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how, why not, what if, whatever. Wow. Wow for me stands for wonder of wonders. Wonder of wonders, something that just would blow your mind. Sounds. How does it sound to be out in the middle of a vineyard? Do you hear the rustling of the wind through the grapes? Or is it very quiet and I can imagine the sun shining down on them, which would kind of get them to listen. But listen for me is getting more ideas from other people. If I was doing this in my live session, I might be asking and receiving input from people who attend my live session. And I've done that, and that is so fun to do. I've done all the watercoloring that I'm going to do to this. It's just my impression of this picture on Pixabay of a cluster of grapes. I think I've represented it enough. I may need a little bit more highlighting in there, but that's beside the point. I'm going to turn my camera off here and set it aside, and I'm going to talk about my mind map. Yeah, I love mind mapping. Now, as I said before, you could go to the very into fantasy and say these are magical grapes that only grow one time a year under certain conditions. And that's a fun way to approach a mind map if you're looking for ideas. But a lot of times mind mapping is mind mapping to solve a problem, to get an idea, and also just to learn more. Learn more about grapes. What do I know about growing grapes? What do I know about Napa Valley? I know nothing about Napa Valley. That might be an interesting thing to research. And I'm just going to write research. I'm not going to do it here. But how did grapes start it? Here's a how. Let's take Napa Valley. How did, and I'm talking historically, how did grape vineyards get started in Napa Valley? I'm just going to put vineyards. I put grapes, but how did vineyards get started in Napa Valley? Very simple question, very easy probably to research. Anybody who lives in California may be able to tell you. But I don't live in California. So that's just a question that I have. Historically, who brought the, who started it? You would say, who started a certain vineyard? Or who started planting vineyards in California? Was it the Spaniards, the Mexicans? Was it in the early days before we even became a United States? Or was it in like the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s? Who started the vineyards? Why? Why did they? Well, you know, were they just hungry for grapes? So why vineyards in Napa Valley? Maybe it was the weather conditions. And maybe it was just the proximity to people who liked grapes. I don't know. I would tend to think it's probably the weather conditions were conducive to growing grapes. But when? Here's the when question. When was the first vineyard in Napa Valley? Then this is all things that can be resolved by research, but these are just my initial impressions as I'm looking at this cluster of grapes. When was the first vineyard in Napa Valley? So this is a very historical approach. It's not storytelling. It's not making up some sort of a fantasy about a cluster of grapes being a magical cluster of grapes. You eat one and you turn into, you have everlasting life or something like that. No, this is just looking at it very realistically and very historically. Vineyard workers. What is the history of vineyard workers? Who are they? Where did they come from? What do they do? And I'm not only talking about stomping on the grapes. I'm talking about what do they have to do every day to grow those grapes and to take care of them? And who are they? So I'm going to put what are their tasks? And I'm going to put every day, not just stomping. Because we tend to think of grapes as either being in our salads or in our fruit bowls or in some liquor, which, can happen. But, I want to know more. I want to know more about the manufacturer and even maybe the history. So I'm going to put the history here. Really, the history could go into my questions. History. Historical. How did grapes, obviously grapes were growing over in France and Italy, so who first brought grapes to the United States? Did they just grow native here and the Indians eat them? So, and then I chose vineyard pests. And, what are the insects? Now we think of probably flies. And is there a certain type of insect that we don't know about? Like I don't know what. Just I'd have to research. But what kind of animals? Rabbits? I'm just talking, who likes grapes? If I were a rabbit, I'd like a grape. And, you know, you could even go into storytelling there. Dede also emphasizes making your list. We have the list here of the first impressions. First impressions. But she also says, like when you're trying to get an idea for a story, and I'm getting more ideas for historical approach rather than a storytelling approach, but she suggests a list of people, and I really need to work on lists. I'm working on them for my Halloween story, but I need to develop more lists. People, places, and things. And then you take, for whatever project you're going to approach, if you're looking for ideas, you pull a person, a place, a thing. Person could be, I think Dede said, an animal, any living thing, an insect. It could be a praying mantis. So, the other impressions that I had here were late summer, because I tend to think of grapes being ripe in late summer, but I don't know that for sure. Maybe they're ripe in midsummer. So this is all things that I need to fill in my own knowledge about grapes, because I did not grow up in a vineyard. So that's kind of taking the historical approach. Well, like, what are grapes used for? We kind of touched on salads and our fruit bowls, but what else? Surely they're used in grape juice. They're juice. Let's see, what for? Are they used in any medicines? We're going to put meds. What if? And then we're getting into the what if. What if the leaf of the grape? We want to put a grape leaf. I think that's a culinary item. What if a grape leaf, though, has a medicinal value? Spelling here, but you know, and nobody knows it yet. Or what if it's that really thin skin? What if it's the thin skin and we're completely missing it? And why not? Why not, when we're getting to the fantasy, why not have a cluster of magical grapes? Cluster of magical grapes. That when you ate one, you'd add 15 years, plus 15 years to your life. And if that was a well-known fact, and what would identify it? How would you know that it was a magical grape? So that would go into the how. How would you ID it? And where would you get them? Of course, there's the vineyard, so I'm going to put a vineyard. And of course, we're talking about Napa Valley and also France. Whatever means like he came up with this bright idea like the magical grapes. Whatever. If that's what you want to talk about, magical grapes giving you 15 years to your life, or magical grapes erasing wrinkles. You know, maybe it's a beauty potion. Wonder of Wonders. For me, Wonder of Wonders is some fact that just blows my mind. I haven't found a Wonder of Wonder about this cluster of grapes yet. Maybe as I get to researching it. I'm not researching it while I'm doing this, but if I took this cluster of grapes and went online and started reading about grapes, I would probably read about, you know, who was the first person that started growing them, where was the first vineyard. I'd start accumulating all this information gathering. Information gathering. That's really what this is. You're gathering all these data and facts. And the more you accumulate and write down, the more data, the more information you have to draw off of to either solve your problem or learn about the history or write a story to tell a story. And I'm not going to tell a story about this cluster of grapes because, quite quite frankly, nothing really hits me right off. Maybe it's that I'm tired right now. Maybe if I sleep on it, something will hit me. I kind of feel like I'm drawing off of what happened when I watched Dede today about the magical cluster of grapes, and I'm shying away from that. I'm saying, no, I want to do something different. So, you know, there's just nothing that's inspiring me right now that I'm hearing as I do this. But as I go online and as my subconscious turns all these thoughts around, who knows? Maybe this will inspire a piece of jewelry. Because I kind of see a piece of jewelry in here. Even though we know it's grapes, maybe there's just something in there that inspires me. Or maybe it's to get back into the fantasy. Maybe this is a crystal ball. As I look at my painting here, I think of a crystal ball. Now, maybe it's not either, but as I look at this painting, I think crystal ball. For some reason, that's what hits my head. And you could draw off a fantasy and go into a story with that. So that's kind of my approach right now to the picture. I just wanted to go out to Pixabay, take a picture at random, but I will credit Pixabay and the artist of that photograph. I'll just put it there in text. So, this is kind of my approach to episode 40. Right now, for me, it's just kind of gelling. I may come back next week and say, wow, I have the neatest thing because of this cluster of grapes. Or I may go on to other projects. But just the process of doing this is such a good exercise. It stretches your imagination. You research, you think about things, you even sit down and go, how do I draw? How do I paint and watercolor a cluster of grapes? So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I've had fun doing it, and I will see you tomorrow morning.